Today we're here with Irene Lizzola, who is a PhD student in political science at Sciences Po Bordeaux, where her thesis focuses on the advocacy for the abolition of the death penalty in Morocco and on the reform of the security governance in this country. So Irene, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
I would start by asking you why focusing and studying the advocacy for the death penalty in Morocco, and what is the situation like in the country as far as the death penalty is concerned?
Okay, thank you very much, Lorena, and thank you for theSquare's interest in my research topic. So why studying the advocacy for the death penalty in Morocco? So the debate on the abolition of the death penalty in Morocco sheds light on the multiple normative frameworks in relation to which the death penalty issue is framed in the country. So according to the people involved in this debate, the issue is not only a matter of legal character, but also and very much one of ethical, moral, and religious also nature. So what is interesting for the analyst is precisely the plurality of norms and of interpretive frameworks that come up when it comes to the debate on the abolition versus the execution of the death penalty. So the death penalty in Morocco is part of NGOs advocacy since the 80s, far before the launching of the transitional justice process in the country in 2004. In fact, since the death penalty was massively employed by state authorities during the so-called years of lead, so during the kingdom of the previous king, Hassan II, in order to silence and suppress political opposition parties, several human rights organizations engaged in abolitionist campaigns since the very beginnings of their creation and activity. So from the 70s onwards, abolitionist campaigns started also to develop widely at the international level. So their efforts were also recognized by the introduction of the second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in 1989, whose ratification by states actually entails the abolition of the death penalty. So this is also part of the demands of the abolitionist networks in Morocco. So the abolitionist paradigm itself circulates transnationally, is in the form of an already internationally established as legitimate normative frameworks and normative reference, both morally and legally speaking. Which also seems also to inspire a sort of consensus at the national level in Morocco regarding the non-execution of the death penalty in the country, since no execution take place in Morocco since 1993. Although symbolically the death penalty is still part of the criminal code and is still one of the sentences provided for by the criminal code. So in Morocco, crimes such as crimes of blood, arson, kidnapping, attacks on state security, on the life of the king, treason, military offenses, and also crimes against the public health are still punishable with the death penalty. Moreover, Morocco has always abstained from voting the moratorium on the death penalty at the UN General Assemblies each couple of years. So at the civil society level, in 2003, the Moroccan Coalition Against the Death Penalty, so the Coalition Marocaine contre la peine de mort, was established. And this coalition gathered all the most prominent human rights actors and NGOs in Morocco, among others. And today, the advocacy work of the coalitions focuses very much on reaching national authorities, but also regional and international bodies concerned by the death penalty issue. And also, it focuses on monitoring sentence to death conditions of detention, as well as it focuses also on human rights education and on awareness raising campaigns. So even though there is an advocacy work targeting the large public and also aiming to have an influence on the public opinion in general, some actors agree on saying that the impetus for the abolition needs to come from the highest level of authority, so the Palais, the king, who actually already expressed a positive view on the work of the abolitionist networks, by speaking publicly in favor of advancing a debate on the abolition of the death penalty on the occasion of the 2019 Throne Day.
Okay. So following what you were saying at the very beginning of your speech, Which are the normative frameworks that are most commonly used in Morocco to advocate for the abolition or the execution of death penalty? And in this framework, how is the human rights paradigm mobilized, if it is at all, of course?
Of course. So actually, the death penalty issue is variously presented and portrayed by advocacy actors, either as a legal, cultural, religious, or philosophical debate, linked, for instance, to the spread of a sort of punitive culture, and also to the spread of conservatory views on justice and criminal justice in the specific case. So justifications against the abolition of the death penalty are various, and among these arguments are the ones that point to the fact that the abolition is not considered as necessary in Morocco, because Morocco is seen as being in a sort of situation of is a de facto abolitionist country for some people. Are also justifications against the abolition also point at the fact that the issue pertains more to the religion's realm than to the one of politics and law. Or that there are people that think that in any case the king can grant the royal pardon to the sentenced to death, so it's not necessary to abolish the death penalty. Or they also say that the crimes punishable with the death penalty are only the most severe, so there are a limited number of crimes punishable with the death penalty, so it's not necessary to abolish the death penalty. So to these arguments, the coalition against the death penalty, for instance, answers by underlining the urgency of thinking about alternative sentences to the death penalty, and to preserve also the right to life that is enshrined by the Constitution of 2011, the Moroccan Constitution, at Article 20, that says that the right to life is the first right of every human being, and the law protects this right. So moreover, the abolitionists also insist on the fact that the death penalty is actually has to be considered as a colonial invention taken from the French legal order, because they underline the fact that the Amazigh customs in the country, also in pre-colonial times, provided more for compensation or forced exile instead of the death penalty. For those responsible of the most serious crimes. So it's a colonial invention, and it's also not dissuasive as a sentence. It's very much discriminatory against the poorest in the country, and also irreversible. So these are the arguments mobilized by the abolitionists in general, some of them. And also, the strategies of advocacy may vary depending also on the level of advocacy. On the one hand, at the national level, some abolitionist actors, although not all of them, demand the limitation of the death penalty scope, so embracing a slightly more progressive path towards the abolition. Whereas on the other hand, at the international level, the position is more likely one of defending the idea of the absolute abolition of the death penalty. So this is maybe due to the fact that in the international arena, and also within transnational human rights networks and abolitionist networks of advocacy, the concept also of the right to life, which is one of the main arguments mobilized by the abolitionists, despite persisting resistances, is more likely to find consensual and homogeneous interpretations, so at the international level. Okay. So recently, abolitionist actors in Morocco started to engage also with other people as writers and artists in an overall effort to make the abolitionist fight keener to the youngest, and also to engage more with the larger public and with people who are normally left outside the abolitionist networks. So in this context, a group of intellectuals, psychiatrists, jurists, human rights advocates, and also artists and writers published a book, which is this one, which is entitled Les droits de vivre. So, une initiative citoyenne pour l'abolition de la peine de mort au Maroc. So, the right to life, a civil initiative for the abolition of the death penalty in Morocco. And this book gathers contributions from all these different actors in order to popularize the fight against the death penalty by making, for instance, this fight socially acceptable for the most, and also enhancing and developing critical thinking also on the issue. And also by portraying the death penalty as an injustice or as a justice which lacks empathy and targets the poorest. And they also point at the fact that the famous death rows obliged the sentenced to death to live in uncertitude, in the uncertainty also of the possible execution of the sentence, and which constitutes in itself a form of torture and also an inhuman and degrading treatment. The authors of this book, for instance, they wish that Morocco, as they say, will embrace the humanist values of the most democratic countries by abolishing the death penalty. And they actually encourage the emergence of a sense of justice going beyond revenge and going beyond public opinion's judgment, as well as admitting the possibility of a second chance to be given to the guilty.
Okay, that's really interesting. I would like to read the book, but since we are distant, we cannot change it for the moment. Before ending this interesting chat, I would like to ask you to contextualize what we have said in this interview in the framework of the so-called Affaire Adnan. So this is the case of a child who was raped and killed in Morocco in 2020. And in this instance, I would like to ask you how this case sparked a debate around the execution of the death penalty for the criminal who committed this crime, or once more for the abolition of the death penalty in Morocco.
Of course. So the Adnan case, l'affaire Adnan, raised multiple issues and was not only framed as a death penalty case from the people who expressed their views on the topic. In fact, commentators pointed at the fact that the real social problems the Adnan case was a sort of an expression of, they were, for instance, the lack of state structures and effective mechanism protecting children and preventing also pedocriminality and pedophilia-related crimes. And also, commentators stressed the fact that there are a lot of persisting taboos regarding children's sexual abuses, and also happening not only outside family, but also within the family itself. And so they criticized the hypocrisy as far as people horrified reaction after the case are concerned, precisely because they pointed at the fact that there are still a lot of taboos on the topic. So regarding the death penalty debate that emerged from the case, the intolerable nature and the amorality of the crimes committed by the guilty so inspired vivid reactions, especially on the social network, on Twitter and Facebook, where people expressed views that were really in favor of the execution of the death penalty in the case, by encouraging, for instance, justice to align to the feeling of the victim's family, so to align to the victims of the victim's family as a sort of revenge. So those who were against the sentence to death for the guilty, they insisted on the need for more severe sentences for pedocriminality, pedophilia, rape, and sexual abuses, especially on minors, so as alternatives to the death penalty. And they also stressed the need for justice not to react in a rational way without confusing itself with revenge.
Okay, so this is really interesting. Thank you, Irene, for being with us and for providing us with such an insight into this topic. Thank you all for listening, and we look forward to new episodes of A Chat in the Square. Bye-bye.
Bye.